There's one for Japanese zombie movies. There's one for foreign crime thrillers. There's very specific genres. In fact, when you're normally in the normal mode and you're browsing through, you'll see some of these real specific subgenres come up and they'll have their titles. This is how you search for them. What's up, Flick Connection? If you're anything like me, you can find yourself endlessly combing through Netflix's library trying to find that perfect movie to watch, even if your watch list has over 3,000 titles in it. But I've got a solution. Today I'm going to share with you 10 sci-fi movies that I personally love. I've got them ranked. They're currently available on Netflix as of June 2017. If you're watching this in the future and one of these titles is not available at the time, I've got a neat little Netflix hack that is going to help you find movies similar to it. And no, it's not going searching for the title and clicking on it and having Netflix recommend stuff. It's a neat little hack that's going to let you find every title that falls underneath that genre or subgenre you want to watch. But first, let's get to the list. Number 10, I want to start off with a Netflix original movie that I feel like a lot of people missed. It came out just a few months ago, and it's called SPECTRAL. This was a really cool sort of military sci-fi. To me, it really feels like Black Hawk Down meets The Ghost Hunters. It's a Netflix original. So it's not the best on the list. It's on the bottom of the list at number 10, but it really is better than like a lot of your sort of sci-fi network original movies. It feels like something that could have come out in the theaters. It feels like one of those PG-13, mid-spring sci-fi movies. I say that because it's not a big blockbuster. It doesn't have that feel, but it does feel like a really well-polished movie. It's got some cool things to it. There's some cheesiness to the story, but the movie's fairly serious, and it's pretty well done. I mean, it looks great, and it was fun to watch. We saved this one for a Friday night, made it a Friday night movie night, and I would have rented it. If I'd known it would have been that good, I would have at least spent the rental money on it. So if it's on your Netflix account, I highly recommend watching SPECTRAL. Number 9 on our list, I actually want to rank this movie a little bit higher, but because it's an animated flick, I didn't want to put it above some of the other ones. Even if you don't have kids, I really recommend The Iron Giant. I watched it a few years ago by myself. I loved it. It's sort of a Cold War era sci-fi movie. It's almost like sort of a drive-in movie, but it's traditional hand-drawn animation. It looks really fantastic. It's about this boy in a small sort of New England town that discovers this gigantic robot from outer space, and it deals with sort of some heavy topics. It looks great. It's got that great retro vibe. It's kind of one of the last movies that was done in this style before they really went to all computer-generated stuff. And then it's also directed by Brad Bird, who went on to do The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and then ultimately Mission Impossible 4, which I think is one of the better Mission Impossible movies to have come out recently. So it's got a lot going for it. I love it. It's a really great flick, so I highly recommend checking out The Iron Giant. Number 8 on our list is a foreign flick called Troll Hunter. And don't get too freaked out by the name. It's not anything like Troll 2 with a bunch of little goblins running around. It's actually a really cool movie. Again, I don't want to scare you off with the word found footage. It is a found footage format, so it is a shaky cam documentary style. It works for this movie, and it was necessary for this movie because this flick was actually done on a really small budget. It was crowdfunded. You can tell some of the CGI, is not quite holding up, but it's still solid. It's a really cool movie. And it's essentially about these gigantic trolls. The movie comes from Scandinavia, so it's based on some of their folklore, but it looks great, it's kind of fun, and it's not, I'll put it this way without giving too much away, it's not one for the kids, but it's also not so gruesome that you got to be careful who you watch it with. You could really watch this with a pretty broad audience, and people should enjoy it if they can get past the subtitle reading. There's not a ton of it in the movie, but the movie's funny at times, but it's also serious. There are some really tense moments. It really has a lot of what I consider to be the ingredients that make a good movie, and this one really worked for me. I think it's the only one on the list that I actually saw in the theater. So there's that. All right, and at number 7, we're going to go retro again with 1957's The Fly. Maybe you've seen it, or maybe you've at least seen the Jeff Goldblum remake from the 80s. The original version is really the same story from the Jeff Goldblum version. It's not nearly as gory, so it is one you can watch with the family. Kids that are maybe just a little bit older, sort of getting a little closer to 10 maybe, depending on when you let them watch stuff. It's a fun watch. I watched it with my family as a kid. We all loved it. No one had seen it. Again, it's a familiar story, but it's got that 1950s sci-fi vibe. So this is one where you could really just make a night of it and really sort of get into it and maybe do like a theme night. Maybe even do like some other sort of, maybe listen to some throwback music. It's sort of like that old drive-in type of movie, but it's top notch. Again, just good classic mid-century sci-fi. All right, we've done retro. Now I'm going to talk about retro wave. So retro wave, if you're not familiar with it, I think you can refer to it as sort of like the music in Drive with Ryan Gosling, which I know is a movie almost everybody has seen by now. But sort of that 80s retro vibe, almost video game style music. And Turbo Kid is a retro wave movie. It takes place in the future, it's post-apocalyptic, but everything about it really gives you this cool sort of 80s vibe. It is low budget, but what I can say is the filmmakers were very aware of the budget that they had. They're aware of sort of what level special effects they have, and they make them look proper. Not necessarily realistic, but they play them up in just the right way, where it's not cheesy, it's not overly satirical or anything. Starting watching it, I wasn't sure if I was going to get into it because it does kind of feel almost like a Saturday morning throwback, or like after school special kind of throwback vibe. But then it starts to get into the subject matter, and it starts to go dark, and it starts to go grim, and it's cool. So if you like either the post-apocalyptic or this sort of 80s retro wave that's coming around now, I highly recommend Turbo Kid. And at number 5, we're going to go foreign again with The Host from South Korea. Not to be confused with the US version of The Host from 2013, which is a completely different movie, just happens to have the same title. The 2013 version is based on a Stephanie Meyer book. If she sounds familiar, it's because she wrote the Twilight series, and The Host is supposedly even worse than the Twilight movies, so stay away from that one. You want to watch The Host from South Korea from 2006. It is, without giving too much away, it is a monster movie. It's not Godzilla. You're not going to see something walking around, stomping on buildings, in a rubber suit. It's got sort of a different take. It's a different type of monster, and it is a cool movie. You got to be in the mood for subtitles at night. I usually have to be in the mood for it. They're so nice and just too lazy. Save it for a day when you're ready for it, and it's a really cool monster flick. Again, that's The Host from 2006, and it takes place in Seoul, South Korea. Number 4 is actually going to be foreign again, and the reason for that, I think, is because Netflix tends to have higher caliber or better foreign movies, or at least more of them, than they do domestic movies for us here in the US. And I think that's just because of a cost thing. It's just a guess. You really can find some just high caliber foreign flicks on Netflix, which is why number 4 is Nightwatch. This movie came out, I want to say, right around 10 years ago. I was super excited when it came out. The trailers looked amazing. The movie looks just as amazing. It's got a kind of an edgy rock and roll vibe. It's really dark. It's from Russia. There's vampires. There's people that can turn into birds. There's sort of all this crazy stuff gets mashed up in this movie, and for me, it works really well. I will say there's a sequel called Daywatch. It's also available on Netflix, so if you love Nightwatch, watch Daywatch. It's not as good in my opinion, but if you love the first, you'll at least like the second enough. And there's supposedly a third in development. This was originally billed as a trilogy, and that just hasn't worked out for a number of reasons. One of them is the director went on to do some American films that include Wanted with Angelina Jolie, and then Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. But Nightwatch is one of his earlier movies, and it is really freaking cool. All right, number 3, I'm going to be quick with this one because it's a little bit of a cop-out, but I had nowhere else to put it. It had to go in this slot, and that's Hellboy. If somehow you missed Hellboy, put it at the top of your list, but the reason I love it so much is it holds up really well. So it's Guillermo del Toro. I like almost everything he puts out. I think Crimson Peak is the only thing I haven't liked. Outside of that, I love everything the guy puts out, but Hellboy is not his best even, but it's really got to be my favorite. It's one of those movies that every time it's on, I'm going to watch it. If it's in the middle of the movie and I'm flipping through, I'm just going to stop. I don't need to, I'm not going to find something else better on live TV than Hellboy. The special effects still looked good today. The practical effects are amazing. I love the H.P. Lovecraft influence, even though that largely came from the comics. And then another reason to watch Hellboy, even if you have seen it, is they're currently working on a reboot. And based on the people that are involved in it, it sounds like it could be pretty promising. I wish we had gotten a Del Toro trilogy. We didn't. We got a pretty decent sequel, but let's see what they do with the new one. In the meantime, there are worse ways to spend 120 minutes than watching Hellboy again. All right, number 2. It almost was number 1, but I saved number 1 for a movie that just holds a special place in my heart. So number 2 is from 1927, and that is Metropolis. If you have not seen Metropolis, I recommend you watch it, but I don't recommend you put it at the top of your list and go out and watch it right away. It's from 1927, which means it's a silent flick, so you have to be, in my opinion, most people need to be in the right state of mind when they watch a movie like this. And I really think you have to do your best to put yourself in a Prohibition era mindset. You need to not just think about what life was like in 1927. You don't have to do this huge meditation, but you really need to reflect for a minute and think about what came before it. And in terms of sci-fi on the screen, there were a couple of things, but there wasn't much. And a lot of people would not have had any sort of visual representation of the future, at least anything close to what's seen in Metropolis. Put it on your list, try to watch it in the right mindset, turn the lights off, imagine you're in an old movie theater and really kind of just let this one do what it's going to do, and it really will kind of blow your mind if you're in the right mindset. And number 1 is gonna be John Carpenter's Escape from New York. John Carpenter movies tend to come on and off of Netflix. Right now, Escape from New York is on there. The Thing will be on there at times. Halloween will be on there when it's appropriate for it to be on there. Right now, Escape from New York is on. I love this movie. I was mentioned Turbo Kid earlier. It's got sort of this 80s retro vibe. So does Escape from New York, except it is as authentic as it gets because it is like 80s sci-fi. It's got that John Carpenter score that just sounds so cool now for some reason. I don't know how cool it sounded at the time, but it sounds so cool right now. Kurt Russell is a badass in it. If you haven't seen it, this one, put on top of your list, just watch it as soon as you can. Highly recommend it. It's just one of those movies that's cool as fuck. If you like that movie, let me know why in the comments. If you don't and you think I'm a maniac for putting it at number 1, let me know that in the comments. I told you I was going to give you a hack, so let me do that real quick. You can only do this on a browser, so you're not going to be able to do it on your app. You can do it on your phone, but it needs to be on a browser. Go to netflix.com/browse/genre/1492. Enter. What you're going to get is all the sci-fi and fantasy movies Netflix currently has on their site. That code is sort of a hidden code that lets you find all of the movies in that particular genre. The cool thing is there are a ton of these codes. There's one for action, there's one for drama, there's one for documentary, there's one for Japanese zombie movies, there's one for foreign crime thrillers, there's very specific genres. In fact, when you're normally in the normal mode and you're browsing through, you'll see some of these real specific subgenres come up and they'll have their titles. This is how you search for them. So that's the one code for sci-fi. I'm actually going to put a link in the description below. that's going to let you find all of the codes. I recommend that little trick. It should save you a lot of time, because usually if you're like me, you know kind of the flavor you want in the movie that particular night, but you can't quite find it. You're looking on the new releases or the recently added and you're not finding it. So I hope you like that tip. If you think you got something out of this video, please help me out by clicking the like button and subscribing. But until next time, thanks for watching.